Good afternoon and welcome to this real-world project management webinar, Organisational Change, the Entire System. This is the concluding session of our four-part change series, and in this session we will consider the whole organisation and what needs to change, the importance of understanding the landscape to see how work flows through the organisation to understand the areas that are affected and impacted. Today we're rejoined by Liz Higginson from 144 Consultancy. Liz Higginson is a successful programme manager professional and spent 17 years of her career working for Nationwide Building Society. Liz now spends her time as an independent consultant running 144 Consultancy, a training and business consultancy. Her career has seen her working on various projects, implementing Agile with great success. These projects have involved leading teams through a change delivery using Agile and change methodologies, providing environments to empower teams by encouraging innovative thinking and Agile ways of working and delivery of an Agile, flexible approach with business and project stakeholders. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Attendees, you are on mute. This is just to avoid background disruption. There will be an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A session at the end of today's session. The session, as always, is recorded and will be available to you as a resource. This will be within 1 week of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over now to Liz.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Liz Higginson, and today's webinar is looking at the entire system when undertaking organisational change. I'm going to talk you through the importance of understanding the entire landscape of the system and how work flows through it for successful change, focusing on how work flows and the importance of collaboration for effectiveness, removal of resistance, and creating a positive experience. We will consider theory and practice, where I will share with you a real-life example. As Lauren mentioned, we have some time at the end for Q&A, so please send any questions through, and we have a couple of poll surveys for people to participate in as well. Right, let's get started. To start with, I'm going to walk through a very simple scenario to get us thinking about what we mean by the entire system and journeys through that system. This scenario is based on a customer buying a product. The same concept of a journey would apply if it was an employee doing something in a business. Please excuse my level of artistic skill, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So, a customer decides they want a mobile phone. The picture at the top of the page in grey shows the choice of channels for the customer to engage with, from buying over the internet or through a call centre to popping into a store. They work through the options, pick the phone for them and proceed to purchase it. At the bottom right-hand side of the picture, the customer takes receipt of their new phone. They then in the future may require additional support or new services to support that product. The blue lined out section in the middle signifies the space where all the business activity happens to service the customer. Depending on how this activity flows through, will determine the experience for the customer. For example, did they receive the right product on time in a quality condition? For the customer to proceed through the different touch points of the journey of browsing to buying to actually receiving the goods, there'll be a number of different things for the business to get right, from processes that need to be followed to IT systems that are needed to support logistical activity, communications, and probably quite a few different business areas involved from start to end of the journey. And let's not forget, the journey doesn't end once the customer has received their goods. It is then an ongoing relationship. All of this activity will determine whether the customer feels happy, indifferent, or not impressed with the product and service they have received, which could then determine whether they do business with the organisation again and what they tell people about their experience. This is why it is so important when undertaking organisational change to understand the operating model of the business, so you understand how work flows through the entire system. Understanding the journey means when you change something, you can identify and assess all impacted areas across the whole business to ensure no processes, dependent IT, impacted business areas are missed out of the plan. Sounds sensible, hey? However, it is quite common for change to be looked at in isolation, causing problems to the business that then cost more money and time to rectify and fix, never mind the potential reputational damage. Let's not underestimate this blue section. The size, scale, and complexity of the business can make this middle layer of activity feel a bit like a black hole, something dropping into it to trigger things to happen, which results in something dropping out the other side. Never mind if customers go on to require further support or services and then go back into this black hole. We'll talk about the importance of collaboration for successful change shortly, engaging stakeholders and working together to understand this landscape, impacted areas and validate assumptions around how things actually work, helps to provide visibility of the whole picture, i.e. the black hole. Having full visibility of what is happening, how it is flowing from one touch point to another, gives you a map, if you like, which in turn then guides you on the journey with what areas and things need considering and planning when undertaking organisational change. As leaders, project professionals, and people who are passionate about learning, here are some of the reasons why we should consider how work flows through on its journey to completion when we're delivering change. Do we want to be efficient, deliver value and remove waste, deliver quality services and products, create an environment that people want to work in, remove resistance? Assuming we've answered yes to majority of these points, these are some of the reasons and justifications, i.e. the benefits of understanding the entire system of your organisation when undertaking organisational change. If by any chance my assumption here is wrong and people thought no to all or majority of the points, please add your comments to the question box and we can discuss any points raised in the Q&A session later. Organisational change is an extremely complex activity, looking at the entire organisational system. As discussed on the previous slide, for it to be successful, the whole landscape needs to be considered. So, what's the rationale, the purpose of the change? Where is the value coming from in what you are doing? What's the operating model? How do all the components fit together? What's the level of change required? Is it micro level, organisational level? What changes are actually needed? What's the engagement plan with people? How are we securing buy-in and reducing resistance? So what are the problems we are setting out to solve? And what are the desired outcomes? Where are we today and where do we want to be tomorrow? What do we need to dial down on and what do we need to dial up to be successful? What are the motivating factors for people and how do we lead the change to increase understanding, engagement, ownership, ability and confidence? An organisation's ability to deliver change successfully is crucial not only to maintain business as usual, but for competitive advantage as well. Looking at the entire system when undertaking organisational change relates to systems theory, the study of systems as they relate to one another within a larger, more complex system, whereby the basic idea is the complete is greater than the sum of its separate parts. Whole systems thinking is a holistic approach focused on understanding how things, elements and systems, i.e. the different components, are related and how they influence one another within the whole. This is what we are looking at today, that influence, and when managing change, ensuring you understand the whole picture to be able to do it effectively. Today I'm going to focus on two different reasons why collaboration is so important to organisational change. First is continuing from what we have covered so far on being able to understand the entire system. And then secondly, the importance of collaboration to get buy-in from our people, to be able to align agendas, to set the change up to land successfully, and embed with the aim of removing resistance. If we start with being able to understand and validate the entire system being changed. Sure, most businesses will have documentation, such as operating models, architectural diagrams, processes, flowcharts, service levels agreements, roles and responsibilities for each business area, which manages and governs how the business operates. However, these documents may not have everything included or give you everything you need, which you wouldn't know. For example, there may be little quirks in the system, local processes that are not documented, manual workarounds, which may be as a result of the system or processes not working as expected, or live incidents that haven't been resolved, or maybe previous change initiatives that missed something or wasn't able to deliver everything as planned, which resulted in a delta that the business had to work around. For reasons such as these, it could result in documentation not providing you with 100% visibility of what is happening and how the work flows through the system. If you plan the change initiative just off these resources, you could find area of the business, components and processes, for example, that wouldn't be factored into the plan, but could be impacted. This is where collaboration becomes key. Excuse me. Yes, all the documentation is a good starting point. And yes, it will probably give you a large proportion of what you need to understand the entire system. But using them in collaboration with stakeholder groups to validate the content, understand how things actually work on the ground, identify any gaps and things that need to be considered, would hopefully provide you with 100% of what is happening in that black box, which delivers your business activity. Which moves us on nicely to the second point of collaborating to get buy-in and reduce resistance, in conjunction with validating the entire system you're looking to change. You may have critical deadlines which are providing aggressive timelines or other factors which is causing pressure from all angles to just get the change done. You may recognise or have seen times when the push is so great to just take what we've got and get on with it. We haven't got time to engage with everyone to get this done, is a phrase you may have heard before or something similar. This can be a common perception. However, not truly understanding the landscape of the business you're trying to change can result in activity not happening, which in turn can then create delays, rework, increased cost and frustration felt by all, which in the long run will probably take longer or the same amount of time as if you started the initiative by collaborating with people to make sure all impacted activity had been factored into the plan. And at least this way, things are right first time, removing frustrations and poor service to the business and customers. Collaboration aids the change initiative by providing visibility to people of what is happening and why, so the purpose, and provides understanding and awareness of what that means and the journey ahead. This helps with business readiness activities and shaping the stakeholder engagement strategy, all helping to contribute to getting buy-in and reducing resistance for the change to land and embed successfully. Other ideas of what and how to do things may also be identified contributing to the plan through diverse thought from the people who are responsible for change activities and business as usual activities day in, day out. As project professionals, it's our responsibility to manage change, and we want it to be delivered successfully. That's why we should actively encourage understanding the whole landscape and bringing stakeholders into the mix at the beginning to set our change initiatives up for success. At that point, Lauren, can you launch the first poll question for us, which is around, is collaboration seen as a key driver in the success of change in your business?
Perfect, so that's launched now, so the poll is in progress.
Thank you.
No problem. So we're just at 61% voted at the moment, Liz, so I will close that either when it stalls or if it gets to 100%.
Thank you.
Looks like we've come to a stop at 69% voted.
Cool. And what do the results look like?
The results are 61% absolutely. Collaboration is key to success. 34% sometimes, as much as time scales permit, and 3% with not really. Focus is just to get on with it.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for everyone for sharing feedback. So the majority then on the call are seeing within their business that collaboration is seen as a key driver to success, which is really positive and a very good way of reducing resistance, which we'll come on to a little bit in shortly. Okay, so let's have a look a little bit more at flow and what I mean by this. So flow is about understanding the journey activity goes on to achieve its end state. The buying a phone scenario hopefully demonstrated at a high level the customer journey, and to service that customer there are processes and activities that take place. Focusing on these activities, the processes and how activity moves from one team to another provides you with the flow, or the map as I mentioned earlier, to then be followed. The idea of flow is to keep activity flowing, i.e. a continuous stream of activity happening, removing blockages or wasted time where things are getting stuck. For change, by focusing on the flow of activity, you identify all areas involved, which then enables you to engage with the aim of keeping the activity flowing uninterrupted. Not understanding the landscape can be a real driving force for interrupting the flow of activity for change, but so can people's reaction to the change experience. In fact, resistance is often a primary reason for change initiatives to fail. So it makes sense to understand the flow to enable you to understand the impacted areas and who needs to be engaged. The earlier this can be achieved, the earlier appropriate support for the change can be considered, with the aim of overcoming resistance and getting buy-in to the change. It's therefore beneficial to understand the potential reasons for resistance. I don't get it is a logical reaction based on people feeling they don't have enough facts, information, rationale on the change. I don't like it is both an instinctive and an emotional reaction based on fear and uncertainty of the change. I don't trust it is an emotional reaction to you or the change itself. People may become guarded and not trust the intentions. So how do we overcome this for the benefit of all? Increased communication, explaining the why before the how, and using multiple ways to communicate. Engage people fully in the process, reduce the fears, and increase the positives, considering what opportunity the change brings for people. Build trust by keeping commitments and not over-promising, spending time with teams and listening to what the concerns are that are creating the resistance. People are at the heart of everything that we do. Not only do we need people to actually deliver the change, but we need people to maintain business as usual and people are going on this change journey. So we need to get people bought in. We need people to really understand what we're doing, and we need people to help us shape how we go about doing these things so that we are as successful as possible. So we've talked about the significance of understanding the entire system, how work flows through the organisation and the reasons why, plus the importance of communication to effective change delivery, including how resistance can be formed. Now, I'd like to finish the session by bringing this all to life, by sharing a real-life example with you, whereby the change initiative wasn't as successful as it could have been, and the fallout experience was substantial from not getting these things right. Excuse me. So, to set the scene, the change initiative was looking to undertake an organisational change with how it operated and also deliver a new product. Reasons behind the change was part regulatory and part competitive advantage. The new product was to be delivered by an independent team working in isolation to the rest of the business. They would design, build and deliver the new product using the new operating model in a way to pilot the new operating model to the business, to build confidence and trust before rolling out the full organisational change. So at this point, we have a number of agendas and priorities at play. 1, regulatory legislation we needed to achieve to be compliant. 2, the want to adapt the business model. 3, the need to deliver a new product that would give us competitive advantage now and in the future. And 4, the necessity to build confidence and trust across different stakeholder groups. Work began, and perceptions of the first phase amongst the change team was it went really well. Phase 1 included getting the team mobilised, design and build of the new product on a new isolated platform. At this stage, the product and platform would only have limited functionality. The team worked extremely hard to create new processes, learn new ways of working, upskill to be able to deliver. It was safe to say a lot of money, hours, hard work and sweat went into achieving the first phase of delivery. At Go Live, as exhausted as everyone was, there was a real sense of achievement amongst the team. They were on a real high. They had done something the business had not done before. I'm sure many of us here today can relate to that great feeling of successfully putting something live we have worked so hard for. Phase 2 then began. This phase was about building the product out to include functionality that would create business revenue. And to do this, it needed to be integrated into other components of the business IT estate and the subsequent business processing and customer service activities were also to be rolled out to the business. Now, during phase 1, the change team had managed all of these elements. It was during this phase we started to get visibility things were going wrong. I'm going to talk through some of the challenges experienced to highlight lessons learned against the 5 points on the slide. The business had a number of agendas with many priorities in play. Due to the first phase being completed in isolation, stakeholders had not been fully engaged, which resulted in a lack of SME availability to support the change, and the lack of visibility meant it was not a priority for some stakeholders. Stakeholders didn't understand the purpose and therefore didn't appreciate the value. This resulted in a number of challenges for the delivery and resulted in a number of escalations to executive level to work through and agree priorities, all creating delays. Frustration started to run really high across both the change team and the business teams. There was a lack of understanding on both sides. The change teams didn't understand why this work wasn't being prioritised, after the pressure they had been under to deliver, and now they felt like they were being stalled. The business didn't understand what was needed or how to do what was being asked of them. They didn't have available SMEs to support activities in the timescales and felt they were being done to. Activities were not aligned, and tensions and conflict were seen within the change team and also the change team and the business. This resulted in work not flowing and getting stuck at many different points. For example, at a governance checkpoint, it was highlighted the correct level of security protocols were not in place for the product to be able to go live. This caused a delay in the plan and a substantial amount of rework, as revised requirements, design, build and testing work was needed. Overall, the change initiative wasn't making much progress. As hard as everyone was working, the work kept getting stuck at different points. The landscape of the entire system hadn't been fully understood. Collaboration wider than the change team had been minimal, resulting in work not flowing through the system. Behaviours started to change, and it became quite quickly an us v them culture. Everything felt really hard. Let's be honest, organisational change is hard, but this felt harder than it needed to be. It felt like two totally different businesses with no common ground. Part of this was being contributed to by the fact that majority of the change team that made up the independent team were external to the organisation. So they didn't fully understand how things worked within the business or the culture and values of the organisation and what was seen as acceptable behaviours. Tensions became really high and people started to bury their heads in the sand and stop talking to each other. They started working around processes to try and get things done. These behaviours were being driven through frustration and caused further delays. It became a vicious cycle. Work was not flowing from team to team, and behaviours became more inappropriate. There was so much waste being created. Big money was being spent and no deliveries were being made. Time was being lost and it didn't seem to make sense. For example, on one hand, the change team were working overtime to get activities completed. But then on the other hand, the work was then sitting in a business queue for SME support with reviews and approvals, so it was stuck. The rework seemed continuous due to the lack of collaboration. The overall experience across the board was very poor. Regardless of which side you were sitting on, people were unhappy and didn't know whether they were coming or going. It felt like it was one long planning session that never ended, as the right answer was not being given. The business lost confidence, the IT teams lost trust, and conversations came to a standstill. And the change team felt they were all alone with no support. A number of people left the organisation as a result of the ongoing situation. It felt like no matter which way you turned, you hit a problem with the gravitas of stopping phase 2 in its tracks. Hopefully, this experience shows the importance of understanding the entire system for an organisational change to ensure the work flows through without getting stuck, the importance of collaboration to deliver the right solution and reduce resistance, and the potential fallout to the business when we don't get these things right. After all, we want to remove waste in the system to make it more effective, not increase it. Okay, so we're going to do another poll now. Lauren, if you wouldn't mind launching it. In your experiences today, how much do you relate to the story I've just shared?
We're collecting some responses now. And again,
Thank
I'll
you.
share and close it once we come to a halt or if we get to 100%.
Cheers, Lauren.
So it looks like we stopped again at around 70%. I will just share the poll now.
Thank you.
So we've got, in your experience today, how much do you relate to the story I've just shared? We've got 3% at a little, 53% at some parts, and 45% with relating quite a lot to some or all aspects.
Okay, cheers, Lauren. So majority of us then relate to some elements or all elements of the story I've just shared. Well, unfortunately, it can be quite a common experience for people, which isn't great when we consider the ability to deliver change successfully is crucial, not only to maintain business as usual, but for competitive advantage as well. Now, I appreciate the story I've just shared sounds very extreme. However, it highlights the potential impacts that can be caused when delivering change in isolation. Unfortunately, as we've just demonstrated in the poll, this is not a one-off case. It is quite common for situations like these to arise to different varying of degrees when delivering change. So to end the story, you'll be pleased to know phase 2 did deliver, not without a number of changes to see it over the line. Some of those changes were a change in executive level sponsorship, change in the leadership style, a change in some of the personnel to create more of a permanent presence, creating more of a vested interest, a change in the IT solution to overcome some of the IT challenges, which came with a number of changes in the commercial space. Not to mention a whole lot of time and effort invested into stakeholder engagement at all levels to increase visibility and understanding around the purpose and the value. The challenges experienced and the changes to overcome them saw a substantial delay in the plan, increased funding and disruption to the business, never mind a whole bunch of very unhappy people. As project professionals, this is not a nice situation or an environment for us to be part of. That's why overall it's about removing isolation and getting the right balance to be able to progress at the right pace while understanding the landscape and having the right people engaged to be able to deliver the value intended whilst creating the best experience for people as possible. So let's do a wrap up of some of the key points that we've covered today. The importance of understanding the entire system for success when delivering organisational change. The importance of collaboration to remove waste in the system and reduce resistance. Ways in which to overcome resistance through increased communication to engaging people in the process and building trust. Some of the impacts working in silos and in isolation can have on both the business and people. Understanding how work flows through the system increases efficiency, value, quality, creating a better working environment whilst reducing resistance. And the potential impact to the people and the business when we don't get it right. It might seem easier, or the pressure from around us within our organisations might be very much to just get things done, crack on with it, as we quite often hear. But doing that in isolation without understanding the whole system and how different parts influence and impact different parts of the business can create, as we've just discussed, real issues for the business. It's something we actively want to, influence stakeholders and our businesses not to do. We need to be doing this all together and understanding the changes that need to be made. That's it for the presentation. I'm going to hand back over to Lauren now to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Liz. That was a really informative session. I've opened up the Q&A, so we're ready for questions as these come in.
Just to check, Lauren, just while questions are potentially being loaded in, I accepted your invite to share the screen. Can you, is the webcam on? Can you see me now?
We can see you. That's perfect. Thank you, Liz.
Brilliant.
There's no questions at the moment, so it looks like you've covered things in good detail. So, oh, we've got quite a meaty one here from John. Let me just have a little quick read through. Liz describes a number of serious issues that created problems for delivery of a change project, and I think suggested that they be relatively easily solved, e.g. change the IT solution. I'm certain resolution wouldn't have been easy, as that would be interested to hear a bit more about specific techniques used to change us and them behaviours.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, John. So, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, time boxed into 30 minutes to run through the presentation to enable us to have plenty of time for Q&A, because that's where the rich dialogue comes from and we can all learn from each other, meant the story was at quite a high level. I can assure you, John, a lot of the issues were not easily resolved. The IT one I specifically mentioned, because of the lack of understanding and collaboration of how the estate fit together and how this new platform and new components would then sit within that, it meant that actually a solution had been procured and had been progressed to then find out that actually that would not work, or we couldn't get it to work with all of the appropriate security protocols, etc. So it meant a lot. When we finally identified that, it was about bringing everybody together from within the business that hadn't actually been part of it to date, because it had been seen as they were separate IT estates. They didn't need to be. And it was about understanding all of the dependencies and the prereqs and how all of these different solutions work together to come up with a revised solution. The revised solution did actually turn out to be a different IT platform, which therefore then meant that a significant amount of money had been spent on procuring this first one, which couldn't be used. So more investment was needed, more commercial activity was needed for all the contractuals around the new platform, and obviously a lot of rework needed to be done from a technical point of view, with things like architectural diagrams, etc., etc., new requirements, security, instance planning and things like that all needed to be redone. So the work was just continuous. So it really wasn't easily resolved. It did take a long period of time. All of these challenges took quite a period of time to resolve. I think roughly phase 2 was about 12 months late on delivering. A large proportion of that would have been resolving these issues that I was talking about, and then obviously doing the delivery. Your point around changing us and then behaviours, when it comes to people, it's human behaviours. A lot of that, a majority of the way we behave, the values that we have, that's all ingrained within us pretty much from birth all the way up. So it's not a quick win. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. There was one of the flaws in the original delivery was that because the first phase was so independent to the rest of the business, there wasn't a need to use business resources, business people at that time. There also wasn't the availability, but it was a priority to the business. So it was decided to bring in a team of external people that would create this independent team that would work in their own environment, build out all of the processes, the operating model, create everything to make this product work, And that worked fine up until the point of phase 2, when we then needed to integrate the product and the platform to the rest of the business, because that's when the engagement started. Obviously, when you've got a large team of people that come from a different environment, you know, different businesses, some of these were other consultancies, other businesses, some independents, you know, they come with experience of working in different environments with different cultures, which are not, you know, and we all know there are subcultures and things in organisations, but it was more visible. So when there was a lot of clashing, shall we say, and a lot of inappropriate behaviours displayed. So how did we resolve that? Well, some of that was around very difficult conversations. We had to front into it, face into it. We had to identify where a lot of the contention and conflict was being driven, and we slowly had to start replacing some individuals. So first of all, this was more about replacing some of the key leadership team, because this is the team that we are expecting to role model behaviours and lead by example. So it was about identifying where have we got the right skills and capability elsewhere in the business that we can switch people in and out. It was then about bringing more of the business and the IT teams into the mix, more into the fold, because more people that were involved in the change from a permanent point of view created more of a vested interest to get it over the line. Some of those things were around changing executive sponsorship, changing the leadership teams. Some of it was around getting more permanent people into the space where this team was located, so that they could start to see day to day the behaviours and the culture that this organisation worked in. It did take time. There was a lot of difficult conversations, but slowly but surely, what we started to see was a new team forming, where the us and the them behaviours were starting to disappear, because everybody started to understand more the value, the purpose in what we were doing. The level of engagement had gone through the roof, which just meant that people were working together more as a team. But again, it didn't happen overnight. It was over a long journey during that 12-month period.
That's great, thank you, Liz. John has actually sent out a follow-up question in response. He said he guesses the key follow-up question would be, has the organisation recognised the extent of the issues and has it learned from them? In his experience, businesses will often keep making the same mistake across all projects.
John, brilliant follow-up question. And yeah, so if we think about this from an organisational development point of view, the theory around OD is that you are supposed to learn, you evaluate changes, you learn from that, and your next set of planning, your next set of changes take those things into consideration. So it's a continuous cycle for continuous improvement. I think some aspects, yes, the business very much learn a lot of hard lessons, and there was a lot of conversation around priorities and agendas. So on one hand, the business had priorities that they needed to be able to compete, remain fit for the future, and they needed to do this initiative alongside lots of other initiatives, recognising that they didn't necessarily have the skills and capability in-house to do it. Hence, the agreed way forward in the beginning was, we'll bring in an independent team. However, doing that meant that yes, all priorities were being able to be progressed, but actually at a later date things stalled. It caused numerous amounts of problems and disruption for the business, and in the end the inevitable happened. Priorities had to be looked at, things did have to be paused to enable resources to move on to deliver what had been deemed the priority initiatives. So I think yes, they did recognise it. They lost, you know, quite a few very talented individuals walked out the door at varying degrees of seniority. which did present some challenges to them. And I think they have learnt from that. Now there is much more focus on, before sort of running straight ahead with, we need to get this delivered, there is a lot more focus now around actually understanding the entire estate, so that actually when they come to do the changes, they know what they're touching, they know which people they need to engage with, and that collaboration has started. So I do think there were some rich lessons that came out of that. Would I hand on heart say that I didn't feel that some of those mistakes would be made again? Probably not, because I think when we find ourselves, or should I say when organisations find themselves in a position where they have multiple plates that need juggling, one of the biggest challenges for organisations is prioritising. And I think until you can effectively prioritise, you're always going to be putting your business under increased pressure and strain, which contributes to then how we behave and how we manage things.
Thank you, Liz. We'll move on to a question from Ashok. He said, what was the underlying issue? Lessons learned to avoid the mistake made in the first solution. How much extra did it cost to get a good second solution in?
Ashok, just when you say what was the underlying issue there, do you mean in regards to the IT estate? I'm assuming that because you then mentioned and the new cost for the new one.
Just waiting for the follow-up, I would imagine so. The top three issues that failed.
Sorry?
He said the top three issues that failed.
Okay, so if we're talking in regards to the whole organisational change, I'd say the top three issues were the initial assumption that this work could be planned and delivered in isolation. And that was fundamentally on the basis that the initial delivery was something completely isolated to the rest of the business. So that I would say is number one. Number two, I would say a real issue that again wasn't identified till a lot later and was done with the best intentions, was building the whole delivery team that was going to deliver this as a independent team that didn't have pretty much any presence from the business itself. So they didn't understand or appreciate how the business operated, the culture, the behaviours of the organisation. And number three, if we do talk back, Ashok, onto the to the point on the IT estate, which is fundamentally a big one. When you are delivering a new product and a new platform into the organisation, you want to make sure that that technological solution is fit for purpose. One of the challenges in that space was this new product and this new platform was proving a cloud-based solution, and predominantly the rest of the business was all on-premise. And therefore, when we got into phase two and it was about integrating the cloud platform with the on-premise platforms, they weren't working. And the sort of the service introduction teams that worked in IT that were used to making sure that everything was fit for purpose in regards to a set of service criteria about how things needed to work, that criteria and those processes and that framework that they operated in did not work for a cloud-based solution. So that was the main technical issue. So then it was around, okay, what do we do? Because the idea of phase one was to prove the cloud-based solution in order to enable us to change the operating model of the business, to build confidence and trust that moving more of the business into the cloud off premise was a good way forward. and the whole organisational change around that. And it sort of stalled at that very first point because we hadn't had the right stakeholders engaged. Coming back to this first point of the first phase was seen as we can do this in isolation.
Thank you. Ashok has followed up and said, do you feel the requirement changed over time once people realised and firmed up that there was the real need? Was the benefits needed, or was the benefits needed different from the first solution?
So, Ashok, I think it's safe to say that depending on who you ask that question to, you'd probably get a different perception. So for the change team, the people that were actually delivering the products, yes, they would feel very much that the requirements changed over time. From their point of view, the initial plan was always to build out a new product and platform on a cloud-based solution. That was always the plan. They'd done that. The solution had all the appropriate protocols, security, etc. for a cloud-based solution. However, to the business and the IT teams, because the level of maturity with cloud-based and products and services wasn't there, because it wasn't an operating model we were used to, what was being seen was they were trying to overlay the general requirements, security protocols, etc. of an on-premise solution onto the cloud, which didn't work. So to the change teams, yes, they very much felt the requirements were continuously changing. You're asking for things that are not appropriate. To the business, they would probably feel, and the IT teams, they would probably feel that the requirements never changed. It's always been our requirements to have this level of security, etc., etc. You've just not adhered to it. However, the lesson in there was the lack of collaboration and the lack of understanding the entire estate. Because actually, if we'd have understood the entire estate at an earlier stage, how it was all going to connect, and we had collaborated with those teams, we would have highlighted these issues and concerns at an earlier stage, which would have enabled us to start looking at how we address them. Were the benefits sought? Yes, to a degree at the end. Obviously, there are a lot of benefits with moving to an on-cloud premise, not only, especially from a financial point of view. So yes, they were. Did it give us the benefit that we were hoping for around building trust within the business to start being able to migrate and transition over to more of a cloud-based operating platform? To a certain degree, the conversation definitely started to become more topical. It definitely did enable more activity in the digital space, to be doing more activity around the operating model. There is still a lot of work to be done, though. There is still this tension between on-premise and cloud, and what is the appropriate governance and controls that support them.
Thank you. Ashok has also asked, was the first business case approved?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll move to a question from Patrick. He said, it sounds very, very, very familiar, and it's repeated in almost every organisation with little focus inwards. Culture and behaviours equals lots of money and potential waste. So more of a comment than a question.
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, I hate to say it, but I do agree with you. And I think this is why this was a topic that I was very happy to talk about today, because I think as project professionals, as people that work in business, as senior leaders within different organisations across different industries, we have an opportunity, albeit I do admit, there are constraints and our hands are tied in some spaces, but we do have an opportunity to try and influence as much as possible, getting the right balance of proceeding at pace to be able to achieve what the outcome is that's wanted, but whilst actually being aware that there's no point running if we don't know which direction we're running in. It's not going to help anybody. So that's coming back to, let's understand the journey we want to run on. Let's make sure that we get all of the right people involved so that that journey is as seamless as possible. And I think the more we can bring that to life in our organisations, and the more we can learn from some of these experiences and stories, hopefully the less we will start to see these situations arising.
Perfect, thank you. We should have some more time for questions. Tina has said, what do you do when you see change projects and emerging new initiatives that aren't tied up or integrated, and you see that the seniors need to consider this to ensure the journey is clear and flows in place to ensure success? Time and resource seems to be a constraint.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, so the first thing that I would look to do, I look to try and take different approaches across, at different levels. So the first thing would be trying to bring together that senior level team to really understand, okay, what is the purpose, what's the vision, what's the vision, where are we going, what do we want to achieve with this? Understanding from them the value of what it is that they want to drive. As part of that conversation, I would be trying to influence, therefore, if you want to achieve this value, these are the things that we need to consider. Raising caution when you're hearing a lot around the pressures around timescales and resources, etc., and advising around, if we don't have the right skills and resources available, is this the right time? Should we be prioritising? How are we going to make sure that we set this up for success? So I'd be doing quite a lot of collaboration with the senior team to really understand and try and prioritise those goals and get some real commitment, so that, as you progress through the journey, you've got their support. I think on the ground with the teams, I'll be actively encouraging the project professionals to be collaborating as much as possible with the different business areas that are engaged and involved, to be mapping out that flow of activity that we want to, that is going to be changed, to be bringing in people from all of those different areas, to be talking that through, to be able to identify, are we missing any areas? Is there anything that we don't know about? Is this going to work? And I would continuously go through that loop as we went through those first initial cycles, to make sure that we were confident that we had got the right people engaged, we really understood the landscape, and when we actually were proceeding, we would be getting it right. Obviously, if time is a constraint and is an issue, you might find yourself in a position where you want to take that approach, but you need to speed it up a little bit. So it might be a fact that, you've got to speed it up. You've got to consider how you get to that endpoint as quickly as possible.
Perfect, thank you, Liz. Let's end on this question. Richard has said, thank you for the informative session. Sometimes due to lack of expertise, we're forced to seek help from independent external consultants that are outside from the organisation. What would be your recommendation to create an environment where they get support from all involved to facilitate the change?
So I've thought a lot about this over my time. What is it that I think we could do that would make things different? Let's not forget, it's not easy for independent people to come in either. It's a new environment, new way of working. They don't have all the relationships, the network that we have in our businesses. So it's not an easy time for them either. And we often, guilty as charged, put a lot of pressure on independent consultants when they come in. We expect them to deliver. Well, there can be sometimes where you expect them to deliver miracles, and we can be seen to be putting a lot of pressure on them. So therefore they can be quite focused, and it's quite siloed in, this is what I've got to do. I think one of the key things for me though is, when you're working in an organisation, you might find yourself in a business that's got permanent resources, temporary resources, partners, contractors, consultants, different types. And most organisations, on a practical level, may have little sort of name badges, and they might colour code them depending on whether you're a perm or a partner or a consultant, etc. So really, calling out and identifying a difference in the people. I think for me, one of the things that I really try to do when I build a team, you know, which isn't always permanent, because that's not the world that we live in today, and that's not the way that we operate. But I try to build the sort of the team culture of leave your name badge at the door. We are all one team. It doesn't matter whether you're an external resource coming in as a consultant, or if you're a permanent resource. We are all one team with one common goal, and we're going to work together to get to it. So yeah, Richard, I very much try and build that team ethos, spend a lot of time focusing on that, because I think once you've got a functioning team, that's when you then start to see high performance.
Thank you, Liz. I agree. I think culture is really key. So that concludes. We're at time.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so with no more questions, I'd just like to say thank you for taking the time out to join us today, and thank you all very much for your questions. At the end of the session, it's always good to talk. To me, that's where the richness in the debate comes in. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it really useful. Lauren and I would really appreciate any feedback you have, and our contact details are on the screen for you to be able to share that. And if you'd like to discuss anything further, or your business is looking for areas that could be improved, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or connect on LinkedIn. Have a good day. Thank you and goodbye.